Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good to see you all. Good to see you all. I'm Keith Brooks from the Education Department, but I'm here as a part of the Faculty Development Team. And welcome to Primetime at the BU Library. Primetime at the BU Library is a collaboration of many different offices on campus with the Friends of the Library, Friends of the BU Library, specifically with the mission to encourage lifelong learning beyond the classroom for faculty, students, and staff. Next week is our last week of the season. It's gone by very quickly. On Tuesday, May 10th, Sankofa students will share about their experiences on their journey. And on next Thursday, Chris Gertz will close out our season with a Not Ready for Primetime presentation entitled In Search of a Usable Past, Pietism, and the Historiography of Christian Colleges and Universities. Today we welcome Dr. J. Rasmussen. Joins us this Thursday for the fourth Talk About Teaching session titled Engage Learning Strategies to Assist Students in Comprehension of Content Area Text. Let's welcome J. Rasmussen.
As always, we have a handout here. I hope that everyone has that. And this will be our focus for today, up on the top part. And as before, I'll be trying to use some of the strategies that are talked about in this larger packet. And I think everybody has one of these. I think everybody has one of these green packets then. But anyhow, there will be two of the strategies, number 60 that we'll use today, and then number 49 right at the end. So I'll be using a couple of those strategies. So that really will be our agenda for the day. I'd like to show you what I'm calling our learning targets for the session today. And there really are three of them. And I'd like you to really think through a bit of an estimate on the percentage of students that really complete the reading, that you assign to them. Okay, we're going to work with that. And then of those that do complete the reading, what percentage of them are really understanding, what it is that they're actually reading. So we'll work with that a little bit. And then like to think a little more about what some of the factors are that really hinder their comprehension of text. What's going on with them, with the text, with instruction? What are some of those factors? And then we'll spend probably the bulk of our time really looking at some learning strategies that you might want to think about using to really increase the comprehension of your students. So those will be our three big things for today. Let's just start with the first one here. I'm going to put you on the spot right away here. I'd like you to think, first of all, about kind of the first half of that first one. And what would be your estimate on the percentage of students that are really completing the reading that's assigned to them? And this is not just a Bethel stat here, but in general of college students, okay? Community college, universities, state schools, whatever. What percentage of students would you say are really completing the reading, all the reading that's given to them by the instructors? Okay, so let's hear some predictions here.
5%.
Okay, 5%.
50%.
Okay.
40.
Okay.
30.
4%.
Can't change.
6%.
Okay, other predictions here. All of the reading. She caught that word.
Probably too high. I was waiting. And then if there's a test next set.
5 or 10? Did we get you?
See?
20, 25. All right, so remember what your prediction was. We'll see if you're right then. Okay, and then let's think about the second part of this. So in other words, think about what percentage of the students that come to college are really equipped to handle the reading load at a college level. I will tell you this is kind of based on some ACT scores. Okay, so based on ACT scores, what percentage of students that enter college are really prepared to handle the reading demands at a college level? Okay, so let's hear some predictions on that one too.
25%.
Okay, 25, 30. Other guesses here? Okay, 20%. 25. Okay, everyone's hedging their bets. They're kind of.
I'd guess higher.
Okay, 60.
Give it a lot of credit.
Did you want to venture in on this one? Okay, 30%. All right. Well, let's take a look at some of this thing. Let's see how you did with it a little bit. I am going to say the sad but true facts. Okay, so this will tip it off just a little bit here. Back in '81, about 80% of the students completed all the reading assignments that were given to them. And then you can see what's kind of happened. About 20%, this was in 97. I've not been able to find any research more current than that, other than that 2000 citation. If I had to venture a guess, I would say the 20% has probably dropped a bit. I think people are even more busy than ever before. But probably safe to say somewhere in that range of 20%. Again, this is not true necessarily of all Bethel students. I would suspect that we're probably higher than that 20%. But in general, across the United States, that's what we're sitting at. Okay, a pretty scary figure in some ways. All right, let's see how we did with the second one. Okay, this was the percentage of students really ready to handle the reading demands, that college are going to face. About 50%. About 50% really are ready for it. I have seen some stats all the way down to as low as 32%. Those that are really prepared for it. But the bottom line, the sad but true facts are that we have, and you know this, we have a number of students that really aren't reading what it is that we've assigned them to read. Those that are reading are often not getting out of that text, what we're really hoping they would. Okay. So that kind of begs the question a little bit, and I'd like you to think about this one too. It's a two-part question. All right, I'd like you to think about why some students don't read the text that they have. And then of those that do read, why are they struggling with it in some way? We have a student here too, so I want you're going to get involved in this one too, okay? All right? So if you can, get a couple thoughts in mind on this one. First of all, why aren't they reading it? And then why are they struggling with the text if they do read it at times? Just think a little bit and then we'll hear some thoughts.
Yes.
Okay, I just call this whip around pass. So what it means is we're going to just whip around the room pretty quick here and just hear what some of the thoughts are in this one. Okay, and Caitlin, we're going to put you on the spot. Okay, this will be our student perspective. Okay, you didn't know that was going to happen. Okay, good loud so everybody can hear you. So,
I think a lot of times they don't do assigned reading just because of busyness, or if they don't see it immediate, like if I'm not gonna have a quiz on it, or I'm not gonna be tested on it, then there's a lot of they might not do that if there's not like something to require them to do it. And I think a lot of times when they do read it, they don't read it at the level that they should be doing, kind of just like skimming through it, not really getting out of it what they should be.
So just not investing a huge amount in that reading process in some way.
Yep.
Okay. So Donna, let's go to you. Just kind of whip around pass. If you'd rather pass on one of these, that's great. Karen, coming in. We're just kind of hypothesizing a little bit about those two questions. Okay, Donna?
Well, I think some of them prefer to learn another way. They would prefer to learn by listening or watching, and it doesn't incorporate those elements.
Angela?
I think they don't value it, or they think if it's going to be covered in class, or they won't read it anyway. They don't think they need to read it.
Yeah. Why spend the time doing that if the teacher's just going to tell them what's in the reading anyhow? Yeah. Okay. What do you think?
Well, this isn't a major one, but I have reading quizzes, and I found out that sometimes students Google questions. So the internet provides some alternatives. Time saving.
Okay. Herb, take a shot at it.
I was going to pretty much say the same thing Angela said. I feel like sometimes students are waiting to get cues from us as teachers as to what's really important. And then from that, they'll kind of gauge whether or not they should maybe read the text or just listen to what the teacher has said and go with what the teacher said.
Karen, you want to take a shot at it?
The second question, I would say, a lot of times they haven't learned how to read the text, and so somewhere we failed in teaching them how to read for comprehension because they don't underline, they don't write notes in the margins and stuff. But you have this book, use it. And then why don't they read it? Partly, I think because they're lazy, and they've learned that they can.
They can get by without it at times. Okay. Do you want to take shots?
I think also because, and it's kind of been mentioned, that there's not a lot of reward in If they read it, they don't feel like it's going to change what they're doing. So then there's no immediate, because if there's quizzes or tests on it, then they'll do more have to read it. When there's not, and it's just covered in class, benefit to them.
Sure. Okay. Do you want to take a shot at it too?
Well, I'm not a faculty person,
Yep.
but I am a perpetual student. So when I was doing undergraduate as a non-traditional student, so I was in my early 40s, and I was at a school that was pretty brainy, and I just fell into that place. And for me to learn to read texts, I actually had to go and study, like Karen said. I had to go study and figure out and learn from other books that could teach me how to read and how to take notes. So even as in my 40s, I still didn't know how to do that. I certainly hadn't been taught in high school.
Sure. Okay. Well, one thing I'm going to contend is that the amount of comprehension that your students will have of text, I'm going to contend it's really based on really three variables that are coming into play. One of them is certainly going to be the reader. Okay, what the reader is bringing to the equation. And we actually had a number of situations here where the reader was mentioned. We didn't have this one mentioned so much, but the actual text itself, okay, how the text is written, how the page is laid out, all those kinds of things, really do make a difference in whether or not we decide to pick something up and really read it in some way. And then I'm going to contend the third variable really is the instructor, and what is the instructor doing with that text, in some way. And I think it's pretty complex. I really do think it's kind of a combination of those three variables that really play into it in some way. What I'd like to do is break it down, kind of first look at some reader factors, look at some text things, and then look at some instructor factors. So I'd like to kind of dig into this a little bit more in this way. So let's start off with the idea of the reader factors. Interesting book, and I'll show you the book right at the end here. I'll go ahead and cite it. But they really did a lot of polling of students as to what influenced whether or not they read text. Okay, and here's some things that students said. This is what really encouraged them to read or not read text. The first one, and probably the most important one to the student, was the idea: is there some kind of quiz, on the material? And it turns out if there's a quiz, if there's tests of some type, that does make a big difference. There's some additional research, actually I just finished reading on this. It was kind of 07, 08 research. And what it was showing was that the quizzes really will influence whether or not students read. It also will influence what kind of learning takes place in that course. And the thinking is that for really deep learning to take place in a course, it needs to go beyond just what the instructor is delivering in the classroom. There's a lot more depth to it when that reading is really supplementing what's happening in the class. And what they found on the quizzes is that the idea of frequent quizzes is a really important thing. Our students sitting in the room right now are happy to hear this probably, but the idea of frequent reading quizzes is really critical. And the point value that's assigned to those quizzes is pretty important as well. And some research has been done on it and actually shows if your course grade is based, say, 5% on reading quizzes, that's not enough incentive. What the research shows is you need to be sitting somewhere in that 20% range of your final grade, is based on quizzes or tests that are done on the reading. That will tend to bring the student to the point of where they're taking it seriously and they're really engaging in it in some way. So the idea of quizzing, I mean, that sounds old, it sounds like an antiquated technique, but it really, a lot of recent research on it showing that it is a pretty effective way of holding students accountable. The second thing that students said is that they will tend to read if that reading is connected in some way to work that they're going to be doing as a part of that course. In other words, if they have to take and use what they're encountering in the text in some way, okay, through an assignment or whatever it might be, they're seeing direct application for it, that will encourage the reading to take place. The third thing that they said, and this one I found kind of interesting, I'll let you read it here. And that one makes some sense too, because none of us like to look like fools, in front of our peers. And And I'm not saying structure these situations just so you can make some students look like idiots. You know, I'm not saying that. But if you do take some time in class where they are talking about the actual reading they're doing, they're held accountable in some way for that discussion, that does make a big difference as well, too. A number of the strategies that I'll be suggesting today, and Caitlin's actually going to talk about 3 of them, too. A number of those strategies are things that students do during the reading process, but it's also things that you as an instructor can use as a part of your class. And it often involves having students really talk about the kind of reading that they were doing. Okay. And a lot of this comes from this book right here. It's called My Freshman Year. It's an old 05 book, What a Professor Learned by Becoming a Student. So it's kind of interesting. All right. Some other things that play into this whole reader factor thing. I'll show you 4 more real quick here. Okay, students are more likely to read, okay, if we found if these 4 things are there. First of all, if they're pictures, okay. Don't ask me why on that one, but it does make a difference. Okay. Then also if there are graphs in there, if there are charts in there, they'll tend to gravitate toward that a little bit more. And then you can see the other one. To me, this is a really critical one right here. The reading is linked to lecture, in some way. Okay, a linkage. If all the instructor is doing is rehashing what's in the textbook, I mean, that's not a positive. Students learn that I don't need to read because I'm going to hear it in class anyhow. But ideally what happens on that kind of bottom right quadrant is that the instructor is really taking that base learning that the text is providing and then supplementing it, really adding some meaningful depth to it in some way. Students have experienced classes where the instructor says nothing about any of the reading. I know it happens. I've seen it happen. They're sent a very subtle, maybe not so subtle message that this reading is not very important. The instructor isn't even going to talk about it the entire course. I mean, that's a pretty strong message that's being sent. Okay, so that connection is really critical. And then it does turn out that the female students are more likely to read than the male students. Okay? We're generalizing here, obviously. I have no idea why that one's true, but it is apparently for some reason. Okay, so any comments? I'm just going to stop here. Comments on this or the previous slide? Just any thoughts, reactions, comments at all?
To me, it's very interesting that still at maybe an adult age, the pictures are still important. Because I know for my son, pictures are very important.
Exactly. And I think we're all visual learners in many ways too. And my gut level feeling is that students are becoming more visual learners than they were in the past.
So what can we do about that? Because most books don't come with pictures.
No.
I mean, I can't think of. There might be a couple of graphs and some, but I'm thinking books that I sign, and I'm like, there aren't any pictures on the cover.
Yeah. No, exactly. I personally think we're missing the boat big time because I think there's a lot of learning that can be conveyed through visual images, and I don't think we're doing a very good job of that. Textbook publishers certainly aren't leading the charge in that regard. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on this slide or the previous one? Okay, so these are some reader factors. These are some things that come into play there. Let's take a look at some text factors too. And if you look in your packet on page 1, you're going to see a more complete explanation of that. And this is what I'm going to suggest as, in a sense, a set of criteria to consider when you're making decisions about what text you're going to include for your course. And when I say text, that could be a textbook that they're reading, it could be articles that you've got, it could be novels that they have, it could be online things, that they're reading. That's really what I'm talking about with text. But these are 4 things that are really pretty critical in the whole process. And I think, I'm not saying go through this kind of bullet by bullet as you're making decisions, but I think if you think kind of in those 4 big areas, I think it's really helpful. The one I would particularly kind of stress, and it's talked a little bit about in text structure and coherence, is I would really look at the text to see what kind of connections are really made in that text. It's called causal cohesion. And as you're reading the text, how well connected are things? Okay, and often what happens in textbooks in particular is we have just a parade of facts. Okay, it's kind of this, and then it's this, then it's this, then it's this. And our brain doesn't process information that very well when it's in these little discrete chunks. So I would really encourage you to look at how well things are connected, how well that whole big picture is being built. And I'll just give an example of what I'm talking about. The average social studies textbook at a high school level has about 150 to 160 facts per page. Okay? Those things are often not connected. Students have a hard time storing 150, 160 discrete little facts in some way. Okay? History is notorious for that kind of fact type thing. But as you're making those selections, think about that connection in the text, in particular. So, I think it's not only the reader factors that come into play, but honestly, it's the kind of text that we are putting in front of them that really makes a difference. I know a number of instructors have looked for textbooks that they can use for a given class, can't find them. They're just not happy with what they're seeing. They tend to go more with articles or supplementary reading, novels, it could be a variety of different things. That often can be a really good approach. Okay, I wouldn't just settle for some textbook because it's a textbook and think this is exactly what I want. But these are all pretty important things. All right, well, let's take a look at the last part, and that's the one I want to spend the most time on, really, is that idea of instructor factors. Instructor factors, and this is in your packet as well. Right? The model that you're seeing on the left side is what has traditionally happened in schools. Yeah.
I kind of have a question about the text, and then maybe talk later.
Yep, please.
How much of a factor should the price of the textbook be? Because that's been something I've thought about recently. And I don't know if you're covering that later or
no.
I just wonder.
Yeah.
Should that be a high consideration for us, considering that finances students are challenged some ways financially?
To me, it seems like something we need to think about. I do know that what happens when a textbook price is really high, you will have some students that will not buy the text. Okay, and they will say, I'm going to share the book with somebody else, and you know how well that works out sometimes. So I think the fact that if the price is really, really high, that will have an effect, I think, on how many people really read, how much they get out of it. So it does help when somebody has their own little book there, in some way too. So, it's hard to, in my mind, hard to give a hard, fast answer on it, but I think we need to consider it, for sure. Yeah.
I think one thing I would add is spending a lot of time to find a really good textbook that you like, and then using it for multiple years, because students are usually pretty well connected and can find other people and borrow it. So if it is an expensive book but you really like it, to just continue with it for a while. Yeah.
I use a book in one of my classes that I think it's a $129 book. I mean, it's pricey. It's really good. I really want that book. But what I did was I talked to the person that comes before me. Our course is kind of built to some degree. We agreed to share that book. And that person's working with kind of half of the book. I'm working with the other half of the book. And students are fine with that. In fact, I think it sends a really good message that we're on the same page with what we're doing. So if that's possible to do it all, I think that's an option as well. And students appreciate that. Just the fact they can use that one book in a couple courses too. So I do think you have to think about it.
I also think that if you use the book appropriately in the classroom, and they feel like, okay, I spent a lot of money on this book, and I'm actually using it. Like, I know I've, as a student, bought books, and then we never really hardly used it, and I'm like, well, that was kind of a waste of money.
Yeah.
Like, if we used it and we got a lot of benefit out of it, that's great, and it's worth it. And most of my textbooks as a scientist are very expensive. So, if it's something I feel like that I can use in the future that's very beneficial in the classroom, then I feel that my money is
well spent. Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah. Okay, so this is historically what has happened in schools. Okay? And what happens is the teacher gives the reading assignment. Okay, for the next class, I need you to read pages 129 to 164. Okay, so students supposedly go off and read it. They supposedly go off and understand it. And then you're going to have this wonderful discussion afterwards. Okay, often that wonderful discussion isn't so wonderful, okay? Because oftentimes, number one, they didn't read it, and we know that's the case. Or maybe if they did read it, they didn't really understand very well what it was that they were reading. Okay, so the instructor has this discussion that's supposed to be wonderful. It's not very wonderful. And then they start thinking, well, am I going to do this again? I just had this discussion that just kind of flopped. And then a lot of them start to back away from it then, because it doesn't feel very good for us as instructors when that discussion doesn't go. So then all of a sudden we're assigning reading, and then we're really not talking about it a huge amount, and then that message is getting sent that we were talking about earlier, that this whole deal, this whole reading thing really isn't all that important. I'm not going to talk about it very much, in class. And I'm guilty of doing this, and I'm sure everybody in the room has done this, where you just kind of tell somebody, go read something, get something out of it, and then maybe we'll do something with it in class. Okay, this is what's historically been done for years and years. This is a model that I personally really buy into and have really tried to use as a part of my own teaching, and it's looking at it in a complete different way. It does involve some instructor investment at the top end. Okay, it does involve something. And the items that you see up there, I'm not going to suggest you do all of those before you assign the reading. Okay, we don't have time to do that, right? But what I am going to suggest is that when you assign the reading, you think about maybe which of these might be worth spending a little bit of time on. Maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and maybe it's at the end of class when you're perhaps giving that reading assignment in some way. And maybe it's one or two of these that you would select from. The one that I think is a non-negotiable, I'm just going to say this right now, I really do think that you need to spend a little bit of time on that vocab development part before the students do the reading. And the reason I'm going to say that is because oftentimes when we find the whole comprehension process breaking down, it's often because the students don't know what some of those real key words are in the text that they're reading. So what I'm going to suggest, especially with vocab, is that you take a look at the text you're asking them to read, however long it is, however short it is. Look at that text, and then think which of those words are what I call the must words. What are the words that if they don't know what those words mean, they're going to have trouble understanding that larger passage of text? And maybe it's 2 words, or maybe it's 5 or 6 words. But then if you spend a little bit of time on those must words, and let them know that when you're reading tonight, here are about 5 words that you're going to encounter. Okay? And just a quick little explanation maybe of what each of those words mean. And just to talk about this one just a little bit more too, I think it's really what we're talking about is academic vocabulary. And by that we're talking about, there's a lot of different ways to talk about academic vocabulary, but one way is to think about kind of that general academic vocabulary, that they're going to find in the book. And those are words like analysis, and compare and contrast, and synthesize, and critique. Now we have a sense of what those words mean, as instructors. When our students see those words, they don't always have a good sense of what those words mean. So what I'm going to suggest is that when you're figuring out what those must words are, those critical words, do think about some of these types of words. And believe it or not, these kind of words make up about 10%, of that content area text. So I'm saying we can't assume that a student knows what we mean when we say, well, compare and contrast that. All right? What does that mean? They don't always know. And then you're within whatever your discipline is, doesn't matter if it's youth ministry or psychology or literacy, it doesn't matter what it is, Spanish, whatever it is, you're going to have some content-specific terms that are really critical. These happen to be some physics terms, that are going to be up here. And when you're figuring what those terms are, those must words, it's not just the hard words, okay? But it's the words that are loaded with meaning for your particular discipline. And those are words really worth spending some time on. Okay? Students that are coming from backgrounds where they're not working with academic vocabulary in their home situation, maybe they're coming from schools where there wasn't a lot of work done in academic vocabulary, those students are often going to struggle, in some way with the reading because these words really interfere with that larger process. Yep. So kind of those two. So I'm going to suggest a little time up front with this, with some of these. And then during the reading process, I'm also going to suggest that you might want to use some strategies there too. And that's where in your packet then, if you want to turn and look at some different options there, you can see some some different possibilities. And on page 3, these are study guides basically is what these are. And it's a variety of different styles of study guides that are here. And these are things that the students are actually doing during the reading process. So we talked about the pre-reading a little bit. These are things happening during the reading process. And these are some different ones that I use. These are some of my favorites. I do have these turned in. Students get a grade on them. It's just like a quiz, like we were talking about before. They're graded in some way. But I use a really simple grading system that doesn't kill me as an instructor, okay? And that's what you'll see on the flip side of each one of these strategies. So I can critique these things in really short order, but they are, I think, getting critiqued in a pretty fair way. So this is a collection of different types of things, that you might want to use. So these are things that are happening, that can happen during the reading process. The green packet that you've got, and I think everybody in the room has this one, there's another set of strategies that start on page 7. I've got about probably 7 or 8 different strategies in there too. So these are some different things. But what's interesting about the reading research is that it shows that the time that you spend before the reading starts and the time during the reading, those 2 times are particularly critical, for the learner. Before, we had been doing almost nothing. Here we were hoping they were reading, and then we're finding out we didn't get very much. So investing some time here, getting the student engaged during the reading process in some way, and then often this time can really be spent in a deeper way, really kind of processing what was there, trying to clarify, perhaps determining what's most important. They still struggle with that in some way too. But it's just a really different way of thinking about it. Okay. So let me stop there and let's just see what kind of questions we've got on this model and a different way of thinking about it. Yeah, Jesse?
Yeah, what are your thoughts about, I could see, quizzes, reading quizzes versus something like we just talked about. What do you think are the strengths of students?
Yeah. So I think you can blend. I think you can blend this as well. I think you can use reading quizzes and use study guides. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I personally think there's no problem with just using quizzes, for example. I tend to not use quizzes, even after all my talk. Okay. But I do a lot of study guides. So I'm holding them accountable, for it in some way. So I think the key thing is bringing about that engagement in some way. And when somebody is reading something and they know they're going to be quizzed on it, their cognitive engagement with it is greater. That's the key thing. If they're having to do some kind of meaningful study guide while they're reading it, that's bringing more cognitive engagement with the process too. I will say that with study guides, if you use a real traditional style where you have the question, the student's supposed to find the exact answer, write it in. The research on that will show that they will better remember those specific little things you've asked them, but they won't tend to remember the whole big picture very well. All the ones I've got in here tend to be more big picture ones versus specific little things. With that style, kind of the more global type thing, they won't remember the specifics as well as they would in that other more traditional style study guide. So I would say if there are very specific things you want them to get out of the reading, go the traditional style where you're asking the question, and often they will kind of hunt and look for the right answer just to plug it in. They'll play that game. But they will remember those specific things a little better. So it just depends what you're after. So I don't think quizzes are necessarily better than study guides or vice versa. I do know you can blend them. But it's all about accountability. It's all about engagement. That's what I think is the critical part to it. Yeah. Okay, other thoughts, comments? Okay.
What is, it says predictions? I'm not sure what you mean.
Right. You could, if your students had the book in class, a lot of them don't, but they could have it in there. You could say, your reading assignment for tonight is 116 to page 149. Let's just open up the book. Let's take a look at it. Look at some of the major headings that you've got in there. Let's make some predictions about what you think this is going to be about. How is this text going to fit what we've been doing in class, for example? So it's just getting them thinking a little bit ahead. When students make predictions, they're investing in some way, and often they want to know, are they right or not? So they kind of get interested. Like I started you today kind of asking for some estimates. You were throwing out different percentages. It raises the interest level in finding, something that's coming later. So it could be along those lines. Now, a lot of times that's not going to be a good strategy probably, but sometimes it could be. Okay. Other comments, questions with those?
I don't know if you're going to address it later, but how much reading do you suggest?
Yeah, I don't really have a great answer to that because I think it's so dependent on kind of the level of the course and Yeah, it's hard to say. What I would like to do, if I could, is we've got a student here, which I appreciate her coming, Caitlin, and she's going to share just some quick thoughts about a student's perspective on kind of using some of these strategies. And Caitlin, why don't you just tell us maybe your major?
My name is Caitlin Mitchell, and I'm a junior. I'm an elementary.
Why don't you try standing over here?
Okay. I'm an elementary education major with a middle level specialty in science. And this semester I have Professor Dan Swinton, who's in the education department for physics and an education class pedagogy. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about 3 different reading strategies that he used in both of those classes.
3 really simple strategies.
Yeah, really simple. So the first one is called the 3-2-1 strategy. And when you're reading either an article in like a pedagogy or our text for that class or physics textbook chapter, we're assigned section of the reading and we're supposed to write down 3 important things that we found in the text, 2 things that are interesting to us, or sometimes it's instead 2 things that relate to our life where we can some way make a connection between the text and the experience that we've had, or a question, then write 1 question that we have as a result of the reading.
Is this in here?
That one's not.
No.
Yep. Jot it down if you want. This particular one, I know Dan pretty well. This is probably his favorite. He wants to keep changing it because it looks so simple, but it sounds like students like it.
Yeah.
Get something meaningful out of it. To me, the strength of this strategy is it's really helping them focus on what's important. And students struggle big time with that. They cannot figure out, is everything important? Is nothing important? This really helps bring that focus on importance. Any of these strategies, honestly, that focus on one of 2 things, either importance or, in my mind, the act of summarization. Okay, summarization is a really complex process. So I love strategies that focus on main idea and summarization, those 2. On Bloom's taxonomy, summarization is everything. It's all of, it's just hitting all those different levels.
Yeah, I would say this is one of my favorites too, and one of the favorites in the class. He always says, and the 3-2-1's backed by popular demand. So I really do like it exactly for that reason, because you're focusing on 3 important things and summarizing those things. And sometimes when I'm assigned a whole textbook reading, I tend to write down so many details and examples and notes, but this really helps you narrow the focus and do the 3 important things. And I also like the interesting things or things that relate to your life, because that I think is motivating and helps you remember it better later.
How do you use it in class then? So you've done this the night before you come to class. How do you use this in class time?
Well, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but often we do a jigsaw approach to each of these 3 that I'm going to talk about, and that means that we're usually put into groups, pick our groups of 3 to 4, 3 to 5 students, and we're each assigned a different section of the textbook or a different article. Usually the textbook is like 2 to 4 pages, and so we each have a different section, and then we read it, write these things down, then the next day come into class, and we get in those groups and each talk about the section that we read, share our 3-2-1 things, and then often we'll come up with a question as a group, 1 or 2 questions that some already had, or that we've come up with together that we'll talk about as a class that he'll address later in that day or in the week. So every day that we do this, we talk about them in class just for like usually 5-10 minutes at the beginning of class.
That talking time, I think, is really critical. It's a really helpful learning setting.
The second one is called the claim support question, and just with your section or article, make a claim about your topic, then use evidence support from the text to support that claim, and then again asking a question related to the claim that you made.
What good readers do is good readers are generating questions in their own mind as they're reading. This, I think, really encourages that concept.
Then the last one is called the question-answer relationships, often referred to as the QAR. And in this one, you are we come up with 4 different types of question and answers. And the first type of question is called right there. And this is the answer that's found directly in the text. So, you know, what's Newton's first law of motion? And then go and find that. The second one is offering you. And this is a question that you come up with that's not in the text. The third one is the think and search. And this is when you have to use different parts of the text and then piece those together to come up with your answer. And then the fourth question is called On My Own, and this is a question and answer that you would not necessarily have to have read. You wouldn't have to read the text to understand it.
This strategy is really getting at literal recall. The right there ones is getting at inferential with that as well too. And again, it's developing that ability to kind of formulate questions as you're reading.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is probably sometimes more challenging because you have to use those critical thinking skills and inferential, but it helps you really interact with the text. And I think every one of these strategies, we have to ask a question, and I think that's really helped. In physics especially, it's one of the classes where people, I think, are most comfortable asking questions just because we've had that practice. And I think when people feel comfortable to ask questions, that's really important of having a positive learning environment. And I think part of that is due to the fact that we're practice asking questions in different levels of kinds of questions. So just kind of talk about some reasons that I like all of them, but I think all of these can be applied across a lot of different subject areas and disciplines. They're pretty simple and easy, and I've used them in pedagogy and physics, and I'm in a variety of classes from science to education to Bible classes and English right now, and I can easily see these relating to being able to use in different texts that I have in classes. When we use the jigsaw approach, so when we all have to come together, I think you were saying before, that accountability piece is huge. Like, even knowing, that you're going to have to be responsible for explaining it to others in your group, I think that is sometimes a lot more motivational than even knowing that you might be graded on it. And all of these help you really actively engage in the text and kind of narrow the focus so you're summarizing the main ideas. So for those students who maybe don't read, it encourages you to read because you will be talking about it in class. You will be responsible for doing it. And then if you are like me, who usually does the reading but is kind of overwhelmed to where to even start to take notes, or you read it all and then you're like, okay, I don't even know what I just got. What was the most important thing to get that? These reading strategies really help narrow and focus and actively engage with that text and then engage and interact with others. Talking about it.
Probably wrap it up here. Thanks, Kate. Appreciate it. Yep. Well, you've got some ideas here, hopefully, kind of in the packet for today, and then I think you all do have that green packet too. And then I think these are 3 really good ones today as well too. So thanks, and we'll hang around if you want to talk anymore too. We can do that as well. Thanks for coming.